Check, check.
The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us in the amphitheatre. We request everyone to join us in the amphitheatre. Thank you. The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request you all to please join us at the amphitheatre. The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. Thank you. The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. Thank you. The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. The proceedings for day 2 for Samanvay will begin shortly. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. अच्छा ये है उल्टा हो गया
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah. Mic check, mic check, mic check. Yes. Number 3 is okay.
hello 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 oh oh they're up I think it's okay sounds good hello hello hello
Can you hear me?
mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? Slightly better. Is that better? Is that better? Is that better?
hello hello hello
क्या कहता है? Where did you?
Anche solo se
The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will start in the next 5 minutes. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. The proceedings for day 2 for ILF Samanvay will start in the next 5 minutes. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. Thank you.
Check, check. Hey.
Check. Check. Hey, hey, hey. Check. Hey.
The proceedings for day 2 of ILF Samanvay will begin in the next 5 minutes. We request everyone to please join us at the amphitheatre. The proceedings for day 2 for ILF Samanvay are about to start. We request everyone to join us in the amphitheatre. And the audience sitting at the back, we request you to please come up front so that you can be a part of the discussion better. You could all just move up. Just move up and sit inside. We are about to start with the proceedings of day 2 for ILF Samanvay. We request everyone to please join us in the amphitheatre. Everyone towards the end of the stage, we request you to please join us in the front rows. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the second day of ILF Samanvay. इस नवंबर की सुबह और ILF समन्वय के दूसरे दिन पर आप सभी का स्वागत है। हमें उम्मीद है कि आपने फॉयर में प्रदर्शित परफॉर्मेंस फोटोग्राफी एग्जीबिशन ज़रूर देखा होगा। यदि नहीं तो ज़रूर देखिएगा। At this time, for children between the ages of 8 and 12 at the banquet hall is a storytelling performance by Amirul Haq. Moving to our first session for the day. The beauty of this session is that it has been designed and put together by the young members of the ILF the festival's effort to encourage more youth participation and be democratic and inclusive. The session is Inside the Exile, an encounter with Tibet in India. Please welcome Tenzin Sundu, a Tibetan poet, writer and activist. Born to a Tibetan refugee family who broke rocks in the road construction work in the Spiti Valley, he studied literature and philosophy from Bombay University and is the author of 4 books of poetry and stories. He publishes his own books, sells them on his own, and is the sole distributor making a living out of his poetry books. He will also be the moderator of this session. Please join me in welcoming him. Bhuchungdi Sonam was born in Tibet. In exile, he studied at the Tibetan Children's Village School in Dharamshala, a town in northern India. He has published 3 poetry books, including Conflict of Duality and Songs of the Arrow. Bhuchung is also a translator whose works include mindful education, theory and practice, among several others. Please join me in welcoming him. While we wait for him to join us, essence of poetry, including My Rice Tastes Like the Lake, which was a finalist for the Northern California Independent Booksellers Book of the Year Award in 2012. Dompa's first non-fiction book, A Home in Tibet, was published by Penguin India in September 2013. Please welcome her with a huge round of applause. We will just wait for a minute for our third speaker to join us. Please welcome Bhuchung. He's right here.
Hello. Hello. Yes. So good morning, Tashdile. We have seen there are some Tibetans also in the audience, and number of people from different other places. So we are actually not sure whether we are on the inside or on the outside. All of us been in India for a long time. Bhuchungdi Sonam came from Tibet when he was a child, like number of other Tibetans escaped from Tibet, coming to India to receive the Tibetan education they were not receiving when they were in Tibet. Srimomon Domba, born and raised in Nepal and studied in India, LSR, former student. And all of us, we write in English. We speak different languages of India. Political situation in Tibet, we belong to Tibet, we cannot go there. So we kind of live between the reality of India and the hope of Tibet tomorrow. Much of our writings actually reflect that kind of a scenario, a limbo life between the reality of today and the hope of tomorrow. Especially in I can speak for myself, some of my own writings actually are more Indian than anything Tibetan. Let me say a little bit about Tibetan writing in English, perhaps as a kind of a background, then I'll request Bhuchung and Thermwamu to read some of their poems, and later we'll enter into discussion. The Tibetan writing in English in itself is comparatively new. It's hardly 50 years. Earlier, writing their own, making it their language of composition is a recent trend. And therefore, new budding writers in the Tibetan community today, in the universities and colleges, and among us in the second generation, for us, English is language, is not a third language. It may be a second language. So we are writing, and we have been writing. There are, for example, one particular example I'd like to make. one of the first batches of Tibetans writing in English were from the people who studied in Delhi University. There were people like K. Thundub, Gyabut Siring, Tenzing Sonam, number of people who studied in Delhi University, and some of them also studied in St. Joseph's College in North Point, Darjeeling. These were the two places where the first crop of Tibetan writers emerged. I have with me a book of poems published in 1978, Lotus Fields, one of the first collections there. My friend Puchung has edited this book of poetry called Muses in Exile, that consists of about more than 200 poems by more than 20 Tibetan writers, original English writings. So let me begin with Pujungla, and of course he's going to read, and later we will go into discussion. Pujung Disonam, as I said earlier, came from Tibet as a child, studied in India, and has done 4 books of poems, and also anthologies that he had done. And he's also a translator. He is a bilingual. He does both in Tibetan and in English. So Pujungla, would you like to start?
Hello. Can you hear? Yeah. Can you hear? Hello. Good morning. Yeah. So the only problem is I have to bend a lot.
इसको यहाँ लगा देना.
Hello. Good morning. Can you hear now?
No. Raise it.
Good morning. There's a Tibetan word called Bharto. So Bharto is the state between death and rebirth. Tibetan Buddhists believe that when you die and before your rebirth, there is 49 days of intermediate state. So that is how I feel being in exile. I was born in Tibet, and I was forced out of Tibet when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Then I've been living in India, but I don't feel quite Indian. I don't feel quite comfortable speaking in this English that I was forced to learn as much as I was forced out of my circumstances. And writing also came to me not so much because I have special things to say, but because it's part of a solution of my individual suffering and also collective suffering of Tibetan as a nation. So, and I also have to tell you that my study of English language ended at high school, that is class 12. I did not study English as a language after class 12. So I have no idea about the technique or theories or all those things. So most of what I write is based on my own experience as a Tibetan refugee. And the first poem that I'm going to read came to me about 5 years ago. I was traveling from Chondara, that's a small Tibetan settlement, and then to Dharamsala one early morning. It was in the local bus service. And I was sitting there, and then one Indian woman with a little baby sat beside me, and then the baby peed, and then a little later the baby pooped, and then smell kind of occupied the entire bus. And then after a couple of stops, she got down, and then Indian old man got on the night. He was smelling of alcohol. And just to avoid the smell, I was looking towards the window, outside the window, and then into the early morning blue sky. And then I had this image of a celestial being coming towards me. I saw women, but I couldn't make her face out. So then, as the image was coming closer to me, I dozed off. And when I woke up, something happened. So this whole thing is based on just that image. This is going Yunripin's daughter. And then I saw Pardon coming from afar, a golden scepter in her hand. Thunder flashed, sky blackened. Fog entered my mind. Fear shook my heart. Tears stung my eyes. For a moment I thought she was going to strike me into fragmentation. My useless self splattered in 10 directions. I pinched myself. I punched myself. I kicked myself. I was looking for a runaway exit. The Great Wall of China stood behind me. I was locked, shocked. There was nothing I could do. In desperation, I faced her. She was still coming towards me, now holding a bouquet of white roses. Seeing me, she raised her hands, and the roses disappeared. Petals swirled in the sky. Thorns rained down. Thud. I gaped my mouth. My heart pounded on a chopping board. The sun shone in the sky. Light streamed in my head. I wanted to jump, shout, cry, pounce. Ozla, illusion, delusion, hallucination. I banged my head on the wall, focused my eyes straight forward, and saw Pardon now dashing towards me, locks of hair waving in the wind, her boots pounding the dry earth, puffs of dust flying in the air. She was a wild yak in the Himalayas, blood raging in her veins in the Gelung River. I stared into the sky and prayed to a million gods and goddesses that I knew. Genesi Keno, Jambeyang Keno, Jizindroma Keno, Bandilhamo Keno, Umbuludu Keno, Aryadeva Keno. When I finished chanting the last name of the last god, thinking that this was going to be my last day on this earth, silence occupied the universe. The wall sank deep into a coma. The sun stopped. The wall behind me faded. There in front of me was Pardon, fisted hands stretched towards me. I was speechless. I did not know what to say. Do I have to say something? Do I? Then she slowly opened her palms, and in her hands were the broken fragments of the yellow stars that she plucked from the wall of People's Hall. My head reeled in excitement. My heart struck my chest. From somewhere deep inside, I found my voice. Ah, Pardon, I said. This is what I've always wanted to see. Those broken fragments of those yellow stars that covered my mother's snow, darkened my father's sky. Those yellow stars that blocked my grandfather's rivers, pierced my grandmother's tent. Yellow stars fractured my dream, looked at me. All along there were voices saying many different things. Thank you. To me, it often comes from things that I witnessed around me, or books that I read, or people that I talked to. And this next one that I'm going to read,
hello, is it better? Oh, sorry. So yeah.
He's still. No, let's go off.
Yeah, as I was saying, inspiration comes to me from many different things. Sometimes from people that I talk to, sometimes from books that I read. The poem that I'm going to read came out of a book by Pankaj Mishra. Uh, he's a good friend of ours, and his book, From the Ruins of Empire, ends in a very foreboding, rather dark note with the assumption that if leaders of countries like India, Brazil, or China continue to sell this dream that everyone living in these countries, that is billions of people, could have the same standard of living as people living in the West, such as Norway or in other Scandinavian countries, then things will not go well for this planet, because you can't. About 1/5 of this humanity cannot consume the same level of things that West, someone in the West does. So, out of his reading his book came this poem. This is called "Losing Ourselves." The shadow is a long apron stretching on your path. Evening cooks night to dark chocolate. Up in the stars, up in the space, stars tremble. Where is the sun, they ask. It is a new moon night. Fish snow water into waves. Sands churning out silent music, erasing our footprints. We are night thieves pitching our tents against the sky. There are a few fire-stalking humans left. We reach out to push buttons. Tongues of electric beam light our profound ignorance. Ants who have no eyes store food for winter. They have never divorced the dirt. Who remembers the split tongue of a pen? Machines spawn words on advertising boards, colors filling shadows over our hearts. There is a long shopping list on the refrigerator. Automatons vibrate in our pockets. Another machine day. Your shadow is long apron stretching on your path. Thank you. I'll read one more and then stop. This is called I. It's a question of again as Sundri was talking earlier. For a refugee, especially born outside of Tibet, there's fundamental conflict in their identity as who they are. So although I was born in Tibet and I know exactly the village I was born. But because I lived in India for such a long time, sometimes you begin to realize whether who you are really what you claim to be, or whether you are actually what other people identify you as. So this is called I. Who am I? Riverbank, mud house, my mother's eyes, my father's throat. Garden of willows, pigeons pregnant. Dust that flecks the altar, invading sacred spaces. Here in the plains, there is no yak dung, just empty water bottles. No barley fields, only smoking cars. Yellow stars look down on my mother's sky. Barley has turned into wheat. Cabbages still fields from the round radish. My grandfather's summer bag is flat. Who am I? A book? A pen? Talking about snows of the land, thinking of the land of snow. Words deny me the smell of my mother's milk, sheep droppings, haystack. Fats of my heart have left, barren void, yellow dreams, numb thought. The milkman has come knocking, 560 rupees for this month. Half circle, full triangle, new moon. I have lived in too many rented rooms. What I need is a home, a shoe rack. Who am I? A hair of a dog stuck on barbed wire, a parcel of dried chura, packed, sealed, stamped, shipped. A nomad tent pitched low like impermanence hanging on the plateau. Dead soil, dread day, flat pigs, smoke dot, hoof spot, musket shot. Some liberations come from green chilies, white fire, white wool, pine needles. Draw mad. I am Kesa's war horse, living on Milareva's nettle broth, playing with the words that mean and do not mean. Thank you.
Our next reader is Tsering Momo. Tsering Momo was born in India, raised in India and also in Nepal. Now teaches English in the US. She has 4 books of poems out, and her last year she launched her new book, and she's already working on another and a new fresh book. We are looking for that. She has been traveling across in so many different parts of the Tibetan, in the Tibetan community in India, researching histories, personal histories of different people, organizations, and we are looking forward for that new book. I invite you to read your poems.
Thank you all for being here today. I like what Pujung said about Bardo and the intermediate state, because I think questions of insider and outsider are very much questions about belonging. And I think as Tibetans living in India and in Nepal and in many different regions of the world, I think the question of belonging and identity becomes more crucial, as the years go by. I myself have always felt that I was more on the periphery of wherever I am or was. And I think being sort of in this area of on the border or along the border, I think has in some ways been quite beneficial. So I'll read some of my poems. More and more, I think the ambivalence grows, not just the ambivalence towards questions of belonging, but also ambivalence towards what home really means. And part of that is because I have been moving around so much, since I was a child, and also partly because I have a lot of family members in Tibet, and I've been going back and forth visiting them, and so the questions and the idea of home that I was presented by my mother as a child, doesn't always go with the reality of what is inside her home place, right? So I think the fixed notion of home and belonging that I was raised on doesn't always measure up, or writing continues. What grows is, I think, a certain ambivalence, a certain uncertainty. I'll read some of my earlier, I'll read some of my earlier poems and then move to some more recent poems. This is from my first book. In the event of change, I'm only beginning to understand how seasons affect me. Winter, snow beating street people into obedience. How mothers held back from stepping out in discreetly ornamented shoes and thin nylon socks. This is the way I count years. The winters we had, summers we were in another place. Arrived in 1971, even though my birth certificate states I was born in 1969. The elders count on their fingers. They have done it for a long time. It was winter, but not the kind of winter they were born into. They were wearing hand-knitted woolen sweaters. I was wearing a jacket that children to refugees wear. I remember the accuracy of the story that concerns us, but who gets to tell it? Surrender. Between the three of us, we had a garden of camellias. The whites were planted in the middle. By the time we changed our minds, the plants had taken root, and we took it as another lesson. The doctor often found something wrong in one of us. We assumed we'd grow feeble before old. And raindrops left puddles on our clothes left out, flattening the grass into our shapes. They would dry, but again, there was nothing we took for granted. If the sun came out, if thieves climbed our gates, if naked spirits tucked damp shirts into their porous ribs, on our side of the town, we referred to fluctuations in our collective karma for predictions for weather. We had many ways to introduce ourselves, but we said, "Where are you going? And have you eaten today?" Autonomy of the mind. In my family, decisions are made by the lama who dreams into fate. The gardener who is rotten way is not as lucrative as the gardener whose garden grows tomatoes, but we're living through a conjecture. Wiser to say sorry within the alternatives of a moment and read the display of toes as assent. Men are men because we know. The men in my family hope to return to a country they left in their youth. They say home and point away from the cement rooms they have built. At home, they say, the grass was tall, the milk was sweet. At home, there was no need for sugar. I'll read two short poems, and I think part of what I was talking about, ambivalence, is perhaps more pronounced in these poems. Adhering to mindfulness, we say nothing. Mother ate meat. Mother watched spiders in camp in her domain. Nothing is not what it seems. We take the animal we hold. The 7 days of our week parted from each other like warring cousins. In the family tree, the names of women are missing. In the family tree, the low branches served well as clothesline and weapon. Once a week, we question whether our country will be free. We are not warriors. We know a working bowel is proof of a healthy life. We know people who do not speak our language are sitting at a table with pen and paper. They will map our future. Thank you. I tend not to write, poems that are too personal. Even as I use the personal pronoun, generally I feel like I have a distance, in the work. But this, I think, is, it feels very personal to me, and I think part of the attempt of writing it was the country know at any given moment. I contracted my mother's dream while I was stealing from her to form a heart and limbs I thought were for myself. They are hers. They do what she wants and keep eyes trained to mountains where snow lions sleep on peaks. I'm cursed with a heartache that will not leave even as she has. My country, if you were a feather, I'd know what to do with you. If you were a pebble, I would build a fortress or put you in a child. I cannot put my arms around you. I am alone, and desire for you is half of me. I do not want to think of you. There is nothing I can do for you. Your tears spill in every direction. Your limbs are loaded on trains. Your children grow fewer and speak in silence. So what is the point of this love? Tell me, how do you stand it? Once your mountains went to war and retreated. Enough. Gather your peaks and fight for me. I am weary of hope. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to read two poems. Well, before that, some of you may be generally aware of Tibet or the existence of Tibetans in India and His Holiness the Dalai Lama living in India. It's been now 56 years since His Holiness the Dalai Lama and almost about 80,000 Tibetans escaped to India and we've been living in India since then. Today, almost about 100,000, 1 lakh Tibetans live in India, in different pockets of India, and now it's a good season selling sweaters in different parts of India. In most towns and cities, on the roadside, squatting on the roadside, people sell sweaters, and that's one of the main sources of income for Tibetans. There are about 43 refugee camps, almost about 100 Tibetan schools, about 400 to 500 monasteries, large, small, but mostly situated in Himachal Pradesh or in Karnataka. Karnataka because at the time when Tibetans were first getting settled in India, the Karnataka Chief Minister Nijalingappa was most kind and generous, offering that kind of shelter to Tibetans. Today, almost about 40,000 Tibetans live in Karnataka. My own parents live there. One of the first things the Tibetans did when coming into India was setting up the basic infrastructure, but most of them actually worked as road construction laborers in Himachal. My parents did that coolie job from Mandi, Kullu, Manali, Rohtang Pass, all the way up to Leh, Ladakh. Almost about 1,000 kilometers of road was actually built by Tibetan refugees. And towards the end of that road construction phase, I was born on a roadside in a tent. And that's from where I come from. I studied in a Tibetan refugee school in Himachal, and at the moment I live there. But I have my own interesting story of my English. You know, when we first learned English in a Tibetan refugee school, there are these songs that we learned from nowhere. We started to sing, and we thought it was English song. We were singing Ingle Ashe Jangsing Pomo Tibi Tibi Tap Tap Ayu Shoda. So we actually don't know what these words are, but we eventually ended up saying "You are the morning." So "You are the morning" was properly English there, but I don't know what gibberish we were saying, but we were actually enjoying English singing. And later, when we were in the Tibetan refugee school, and as usual, when we learn language, a new language, we actually pick up what is called the dirty word first. So this word F-U-C-K came to us in a very different form. It wasn't F-U-C-K, it was F-O-K. So as a kid, when we were going to the refugee school, you know, we used to write on toilet walls, school walls, saying Tashi, mostly name of a boy, Dolma, name of a girl, Tashi F-O-K Dolma, somewhere. Class 3A, Dolma F-O-K, class 7, something, something. So I'm now writing in my poem, incomplete yet now. So I'm writing, before folk was a word, F-O-K. Before folk was a word, I knew it had to do something with my bimbi. Now those of you who are Tibetan, you will actually understand bimbi. Bimbi is the baby's language for penis. Before folk was a word, I knew it had to do something with my bimbi. It's an incomplete poem, but I'm still in the process of building it up. As I was saying right in the beginning, exile is, I'm so very excited by the whole idea of exile, living in an exile, and I actually think that I'm the exile king, because I enjoy living in this. There is this usual stereotypical idea of refugee being painful and suffering and sickly, but I didn't see this in the Tibetan community. When I think of refugee, I think of other people. I don't think of ourselves. In a school, we first watched this Hindi film called Kranti. There were so many freedom fighters, and all of them used to wear a tika. So in our school, we rubbed the fingernails up and down 108 times and made a mark on a forehead and said, I am now a Pakka refugee. So being a refugee was a source of inspiration. There is something great purpose to live for. So for me, this idea of having my home, mera ghar kab hoga, it doesn't matter to me today. Because home I have, in my so many years of living, struggling as an activist, as a writer, traveling, the journey itself is the home. So I must make sure that I'm happy all the time. Whether I'm, as an activist, I've been to 14 different jails. I have an interesting record of going to, getting jailed and beaten up and, fighting court cases. So I write about these. I write about the journey, where I'm going, what I'm doing, exciting things that I'm thinking of doing. This poem called When It Rains in Dharamshala. This was written in Dharamshala, and some of you have come to Dharamshala. My friend Jerry is there, who's come to Dharamshala, and they may be, my friend Neeraj also here during the rain. And if you have come to Dharamshala, have not seen the rains, you have not seen Dharamshala. Dharamshala is most interesting at the time of rain. And now, pardon me if I sound like, I'm campaigning for Dharamshala tourism. Sorry, no. Dharamshala is most beautiful during the rainy season. It rains so much, itna barish. This usual English idiom called, it rains cats and dogs. In Dharamshala, it rains cats, dogs, and donkeys. Like, itna barish. These cheap Chinese umbrellas don't work. You need to have these proper long black Indian umbrellas. Only that kind of things work. So this is a poem, it's called When It Rains in Dharamshala. When it rains in Dharamshala, raindrops wear boxing gloves. Thousands of them come crashing down and beat my room. Under its tin roof, my room cries from inside and wets my bed, my papers. Sometimes the clever rain comes from behind my room. The walls lift their heels and allow a small flood country. Notes on freedom, memoirs of my prison days, letters from college friends, crumbs of bread and Maggie noodles rise sprightly to the surface, like a sudden recovery of a forgotten memory. 3 months of torture. Monsoon in the needle-leaved pines. Himalaya, rinsed clean, glistens in the evening sun. Until the rain calms down and stops beating my room, I need to console my tin roof, who has been on duty from the British Raj. This room has sheltered many homeless people, now captured by mongooses and mice, lizards and spiders, and partly rendered by me. A rendered room for home is a humbling existence. My Kashmiri landlady at 80 cannot return home. We often compete for beauty, Kashmir or Tibet. Every evening I return to my rendered room. But I'm not going to die this way. There has got to be some way out of here. I cannot cry like my room. I have cried enough in prisons and in small moments of despair. There has got to be some way out of here. I cannot cry. My room is wet enough. The second poem is called Somewhere I Lost My Losar. Losar in Tibetan is New Year, the Tibetan New Year. Tibetan New Year usually falls between February and March. And that's the time when although we are, of course, scattered all around India, and now different parts of the world, and Losar is the time when we all come together, enjoy our own different experiences that we have brought from school, sweater selling business, from army, so many quarters of India, and live together. But I've been wondering, when was the last time I celebrated Losar with my family? My uncle, they are in Varanasi, my brother and sister in Delhi, they are traveling, my parents in South India, I'm in Dharamshala. It's all scattered. So I realized this. Somewhere along the path, I lost it, don't know where or when. It wasn't a one fine day incident. As I grew up, it just got left behind, very slowly. And I didn't go back for it. It was there when, as a kid, I used to wait for the annual Momo dinner, when we lined up for gifts that came wrapped in newspapers in our refugee school. It was there when we all gained a year together, before birthdays were cakes and candles. Somewhere along the path, I lost it, don't know where or when. When new clothes started to feel stiff and firecrackers threatening, when our jailed heroes ate at the pigsties there, or were dead, heads smashed against the wall as we danced to Bollywood numbers here. When the boarding school and uniforms took care of our daily needs, when family meant just good friends, sometime when Losar started to mean just a new year, few sacred routines, somehow I lost my Losar. Somewhere along the path, I lost it, don't know where or when. Colleged in seaside city when it was still Bombay. Sister's family on pilgrimage, uncle in Varanasi, mother grazing cows in South India, still need to report to Dharamshala police. Couldn't get train tickets, too risky to try waiting list. It's 3 days, including return journey is 1 week. Even if I go, other siblings may not find the time. It's been 20, somewhere along the path, I lost it where or when. Losar is when we, the juveniles and bastards, call home across the Himalayas and cry into the wire. Losar is some plastic flowers and a Momo party. And then in 2008, when our people rode horses shouting freedom against the rattling machine guns, when they died like flies in the Olympics spectacles, we shaved our heads bald and threatened to die by fasting, but failed. Somewhere along the path, I lost it, don't know where or when. Somewhere I lost my Losar. So, in conclusion, for me, my parents who came from Tibet, they have the memory of Tibet. They live in nostalgia. They are old today, and they are increasingly losing hope that they may not be able to return home. They live in nostalgia. I have no nostalgia of Tibet because I have never lived there. I live on the borrowed memories of Tibet, and when I go out and speak to Indians, I talk to them about Tibet, about which my parents, my grandparents told us. We are the second generation growing up in India. Now the third generation Tibetans are already writing English in schools and already in college. This is why we are today. This is where the exile writing is. With this, I'd like to conclude our reading. I welcome questions, comments, remarks we can discuss. You may ask any question to particularly any of us, or if you would like to make a remark where we can respond to. It's open. And there are Tibetans here. You may ask your questions in Tibetan also, or Hindi, or Tamil. I speak Tamil, so in case.
Hello? 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 I would like to. You mentioned about the brass from the ruins of the empire, right? And coincidentally, I'm just read that in the middle, and the book inspired you to write this poem called "Losing Yourself." But while me reading this book, I had a different interpretation. And the way the book began, it says how the Asian countries, they rose, after Japanese won the war of 1904 with Russia. And then after that, there is a whole lot of replication taking place across the Asian countries, India, in Middle East, that, there's a certain inbuilt confidence overcoming that, we Asians cannot be dominated forever, My question, that struck me, like, why didn't that kind of thought come into the Tibetan peoples, during that time, Even they were, Tibet were also under the process. I think it was in during that period that, British and for the first time annexed Tibet, and Dalai Lama had to flee to India. So what do we have to say about that? Were we too lost in the generation? Two of the writers, like you have been born and brought up in Tibet, but whereas in the coming generations now, you can say the third generations, they don't have that kind of relation. So how do you continue this kind of literature, should I say, or this kind of a culture of nostalgia? Like, is there a challenge that's coming, or is it fading, or what kind of trend is it having in the current scenario or generation? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the question. I think Pankaj Mishra's book, as you rightly said, traces intellectual development in India, China, and Middle East, I think. So, but his book, in spite of the fact that the book opens with the Japanese defeat of Russia in 1905 war in the battle, the book still ends with a very, as I said before, in a very foreboding note that if, in spite of the fact that China and India now are a free country, but what in the last 50 years China and India ended up doing is imitating their masters. We have, if you look at China and India both, we have economic system which is not really suitable for our people. There's rampant consumerism and development is all good, while the majority of the people who live in the villages and agriculture especially is kind of sidetracked. So we see we haven't learned so much from under living in colonialism for 200 years or so. So for that was what I got at the end of the book, especially the last 5 pages. So that's how my point came about. But I think reflecting on Tibet's status, whether they were intellectuals who could have probably have different vision for Tibet other than what actually happened. It is not that there were not Tibetan intellectuals who did not think differently. A case in point is Gendin Chimbe, for example. India, he learned English and did a lot of communist kind of organization in Kalimpong. So I think, but what happened to Gendin Chimbe when he went back to Tibet with all his of India under British, and then of all things that he learned, thinking that he will make changes inside Tibet, he was imprisoned, he died. But how did this happen to Gendin Chembe, who was one of the foremost 20th century Tibetan intellectual? I think if you look at Tibetan history, when Buddhism was introduced to Tibet in the 7th century, by mid-8th century, Chisong Dezen made Buddhism a state religion. So what happened was people who were living in these pockets of Tibet, Tibetan language become a national language, and then along with that came Buddhist thought. So people who had different way of living, way of looking at things, they all become uniform. And in a way, maybe it's good because it gave Tibetan a collective sense of identity, that Buddhist culture and stuff. But on the other hand, it suppressed a lot of things. And Gendin Chembe's persecution, I think, as far as I know, happened. His ideas did not go well with establishment, and that establishment overwhelmingly came from Buddhist side of the Tibetan society, not from secular part. So I think that might have something to do with our failure of producing intellectuals who could have a different vision for Tibet, I think.
I'll maybe try and respond to the second question you had. I'll only respond maybe just to one part, which is that I think in exile, for a long, long time, I think we've assumed that we are the people who are the caretakers, of our culture, of our identity, or that we are the ones who are preserving Tibetan culture and Tibetan identity. And I think it's sort of maybe time for us to realize that Tibetans inside Tibet, the majority of Tibetans, are living inside Tibet, and they have a very vibrant, see it as a turn to look towards them, maybe to have them have a larger voice. I don't know if that really addresses your question, or maybe I wasn't paying attention too closely.
I'll say just a few words on the second question, and then we'll take your question. I think there has been a lot of feelings towards older generation, and especially the new generation wants. So I think, and then there is overwhelming sweeping statements such as Tibet had glorious cultural heritage and then history, as if present does not exist. So when you say Tibet had glorious history and culture, and then it sounds like as if there's nothing happening now. But of course, a lot is happening. As Sring was saying, 97% of Tibetans live inside Tibet, and in spite of all the Chinese persecution and crackdown and restriction, about 400 to 500 books are being published from inside Tibet. There are about 200 journals being printed inside Tibet, some of them circulation as high as 27,000 copies each. So I think if you look at this evolving intellectual culture inside Tibet, and also in exile, we have far more Tibetans writing in Tibetan in exile than in English in other languages. So I think this idea that maybe a younger generation do not have the cultural identity as much as older generation, I think it's a kind of a where you look at it and how you look at it and